This program is produced by KAID TV for the Idaho Public Broadcasting Network.
From the state capitol in Boise, the 1981 Idaho Legislature. Good evening. The Idaho House of Representatives voted today to spend $2 million more on higher education in this state, including about $300,000 for the state's public television system. The state budget continues to be the big story here as the 1981 Idaho Legislature moves closer and closer toward adjournment. Gene McNeil begins our wrap-up of the day's activities here today with a report on just how the money bills fared. Gene?
Thank you, Mark. Well, the House disposed of a long list of budget bills today, among them one that would dismantle Health and Welfare's regional administration and another that would pump more money into higher education and provide some support for public television. The successful effort to get more money for higher education came after two failed attempts last week to amend the original budget bill, which eventually passed and now is up for passage in the Senate, excuse me. As engineered by Genesee Republican Tom Boyd, today's proposal would take $2 million from the Water Pollution Control Fund, give $300,000 of that to public television, the rest to the state's colleges. Opposition was led by CUNA Republican Gene Winchester, who listed 3 reasons for his no vote, including the fact that the House had already debated and passed the original higher ed bill developed by the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee.
That's the first reason I would say vote no. We've already plotted this ground and we've gone over it over and over again, and I don't think it has much success of passage. If it got over across the rotunda, I think at this late hour it's not wise to come over here on our side and try to open this budget a third time. The second reason I would oppose it is the Water Pollution Control Fund is broke. The raids on that have far exceeded what we started out to do. We've made some commitments early in the year that perhaps we could tap it for cleanup of Mount St. Helens and the necessary things that we felt we had to do at the prison and no more. And yet we've seen this resolve be whittled away over and over again till it's, instead of a few $1 million, we've took every dollar that there is and we're taking every dollar that there might possibly be and beyond that in this measure. Then the third thing about public TV. And I feel very strongly about the quality of programs on our local Channel 4. It is a good station. But I feel that, as has been mentioned before, that it's probably not a tax obligation of everybody in this state to fund that when they don't be, or when they're not able to receive the station in their hometown. And it should be more specific in its funding. And I think the Joint Committee made a good move when they said we will be responsible for the state, the microwave system, and we'll fund that, but the local people who benefit from those programs should pay the bill.
Salmon Republican Ray Infanger argued that a separate appropriation to maintain the state's microwave system would help public television, and he said higher education could manage. His main concern was the water fund.
Fund is needed for water, and don't you be sold that it isn't. And all I can say, as they say at the ball games, hold that line, hold that line, hold that line.
But Boyd contended that the water fund would not be broke even if all the raid bills passed. And he pointed out the House has already passed legislation providing for a payback out of this year's surplus.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have, if all these bills pass that do take funds from the Water Pollution Control Fund, we have brought that fund down low. No question about that. However, we are prepared with legislation to restore those funds. Incidentally, all these funds that are obligated are not drawn out at the end of any fiscal year. They are ongoing. So there is money in there. In fact, there is $23 million in the fund right now. I mean, the money is there. Granted, it's obligated and it will be drawn out over a period of years. So it isn't like we're going to go into the red in that fund as of June 30th, if this bill passes. I think the gentleman, Mr. Trillhouse, was correct. We probably have spent maybe too much time discussing public television because it is only $300,000 out of this $2 million appropriation. The concern that several of us have, many of us have, is though that we should keep this program functioning. I think they can get themselves put together and fund themselves in future years and not have to draw on general fund money. This is our hope and our concern.
Unlike last week's attempts to pump up the higher education budget, this one did pass by a fairly hefty margin of 42 to 28. Its fate in the Senate, however, is far less certain. Well, another controversial budget bill that had already passed the Senate was up in the House today. It provides for the dismantling of Health and Welfare's regional administration. Supporters of regional administration argued that to eliminate it would impact services and would destroy local control. Opponents called it just another layer of unnecessary bureaucracy. Here's how some of that debate went today with Blackfoot Republican Darwin Young on one side, Boise Republican Chris Hooper on the other.
I think that we can say that we can cut out this middle-level bureaucracy and still deliver the services. Now, the point has been brought out that some of these people out in the field are not going to have an office manager. But I would say that with mental health and ADC and social services and financial assistance, there will be supervisors there. So you're going to have plenty of expertise there to supervise these services and to order the plumber to fix the plumbing and all those types of things that we have to do in those offices. I think this is good legislation. I think this is something that has been needed for a long time, and I urge your support of this bill.
But Hooper said he'd looked into what the same kind of cuts would do to his business, and he didn't like the result.
Mr. Speaker, the office for which I work would not be able to do any business if those positions were eliminated. Now, maybe I'm a little bit personally involved here because one of those would have been mine. But as I think of the way our business does business and our office does, it just would not work. And I would remind the gentlemen here and the ladies, excuse me, I would remind the representatives here that many of you are in a hurry to get back to your business or to get back to your ranch or farm. And I would ask you, why is that you're in a hurry to go? It is because you believe that you must be there to manage the planting of the crops and getting your farms ready for the crop, or you must be there to manage your store or your business. Regardless of how many individual supervisors we have in an office, somebody has to run the office. And it seems to me that this appropriation does away with those people who actually run the office and make the whole thing cohesive and work, and I think that is a great mistake, Mr. Speaker.
Despite the opposition of Hooper and others, there was no move to amend that budget bill today, as there had been in the Senate last week. The bill passed 36 to 23. It now goes to the governor, who is known to be unhappy with it, but who has not talked specifically of a veto. Among the other budgets approved today, the Department of Corrections, with money for new guards, but perhaps with not enough money to pay for their salary adjustments. The Department of Parks, which has already said it will close at least 3 parks this summer. Water Resources, a low figure, but one which may be up to $500,000 in a separate bill. And the Division of Community Rehabilitation in the Department of Health and Welfare. That one pays for mental health, child development centers, and the state's 4 institutions. All 4 of those have passed both houses. They go to the governor. Also passed by the House today, 2 more bills to increase appropriations, $100,000 for air quality programs, $500,000 for meat inspection. Those 2 must still clear the Senate. And finally today, one last attempt to get a pay hike for the state's 12,000 state employees. That move came in the House State Affairs Committee this morning, where Republicans overrode the objections of the minority Democrats and voted to introduce 2 proposals that together would provide a 7% across-the-board raise. A previous attempt to give such a raise failed when a companion bill was vetoed by Governor John Evans. Republicans on the committee argued this morning that failure to raise salaries this year would mean state employees would need an 18 to 20% hike next year in order to keep pace with wages in private industry. Democrats didn't dispute that, but they did object to the underfunding of the pay increase, which could mean the loss of as many as 250 positions. But despite those objections, the pay raise proposals were sent to the floor. They could be acted on by the full House as early as tomorrow. Mark?
Thank you, Jean. The Senate's Local Government and Taxation Committee voted this morning to hold and, in effect, to kill legislation that would remove the sales tax exemption enjoyed by contractors at the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory in eastern Idaho. Supporters of that legislation say removing the exemption could bring as much as $14 million new dollars to the state's coffers. Senate Democrats tried later this morning to force that legislation from committee, an effort that failed, but an effort that nonetheless gave Democrats a chance to take some partisan potshots at Senate Local Government Committee Chairman Dane Watkins of Idaho Falls. Watkins, who has many INEL employees in his district, was successful in beating back the effort to force the legislation from his committee, but he ended up apologizing for breaking a Senate rule and for not informing the sponsor of the INEL bill that it would be considered by his committee this morning. It was a rare display of open senatorial criticism. Here's how it went, with Watkins first arguing that the INEL bill should remain in his committee.
So I think it's important we think in terms of what's best for the future of our state and excuse the committee, allow the committee system to work. We've tried to bring the legislation to us and have a hearing and bring the people that are interested in it, and I would hope that you'd support the committee.
Democrat Kermit Keebear, the author of the exemption repealer, was not told of this morning's hearing. He did not attend. Keebear said he supported the concept of the committee system, but
I've got a tremendous amount of information that I feel should be shared with the whole body. I didn't have that opportunity to share that information this morning. It would be my intention that if in fact we could bring this particular piece of legislation before us, that we would in fact hold it for a day and let people find out the implications or the ramifications, whatever that might be. So, Mr. President, members of the committee, again I would emphasize, I think we have found the time when we should use that particular rule today. And I would hope that you wouldn't excuse the committee and that we all might have this information before us.
another Democrat, John Peavy, pressed Watkins for an explanation of why Watkins had personally removed 5 official House bills from the Senate last weekend. Senator Watkins was excused from the Senate Saturday when Democrats tried unsuccessfully to pry the INEL legislation from his committee. He had it with him, the official bill.
Had the Senate decided last Saturday to call for that bill and have it brought forthwith to the desk, the system would have broken down because the bill was not in the chamber and we could not have considered it. Now, if you're asking us to support the committee system, how does this fit in with how the thing has been handled up until now? I see some irregularities. I think the committee system has, to an extent, broken down, and I think the Senate is perfectly justified in calling for that bill at this time because of the history of what has happened, and whether it was, whether there was any malicious intent or not. I'm sure.
What is the question of the senator?
Would the senator from District 30 respond to those problems, whether the committee system really is defensible up until this point?
Senator Manser.
Be glad to, Mr. President. I admit I made a mistake, and I wasn't aware of the rule, and I won't take this legislation from this body, but I tried to do my homework over the weekend, had some personal commitments on Saturday that didn't allow me to be here. I left some pairs with the leadership. I expressed my desire to be gone to the President of the Senate and wrote him a letter, and it won't be removed in the future. I might also say that our Department of Energy officials were not asked to testify in the House on this legislation. I think it's important when you have a $450 million industry and 10,000 employees, the second largest employer in the state, they should be given that opportunity too. Things have been happening very fast around here in the last few days, and it's my intention, and I should have asked Senator Keebear to be there this morning, but I knew it was in the paper, and I knew we had a hearing last night, and it was difficult to cover the waterfront on a 3-hour hearing yesterday, but we want to discuss the issues, and our committee did discuss the issues, and we had that points of view, and the good senator was in a position today to vote against holding that legislation, which he did, and that's fine if that's what the good senator wanted to do. But to me, this is an important issue, and we should study this matter, and if it isn't satisfied during the next 6 months, we'll be back in January and we can go again. But I think because this industry is a big employer of this state, because there's so many ramifications, I think your security system should be supported.
There were more brickbats with charges that Watkins constantly changes committee agendas.
My desk last night, an agenda for local government. The agenda read, House Bill 121, House Concurrent Resolution 17, House Bill 197, House Bill 120, House Bill 225. Mr. President, members of the Senate, I was grateful to get that. I think that's a good deal. It allows me an opportunity to take a look at what we're going to be talking to tomorrow, the next day, and prepare for that meeting. But when I sat down at my desk this morning, I found another agenda on my desk. It says House Bill 386, House Bill 43, House Concurrent Resolution 17, House Bill 197, House Bill 120, House Bill 225, House Bill 260, House Bill 95, House Bill 199, House Bill 436. Well, I had no way in the world that I could prepare for that meeting. Then I got another shock when I went up and sat down at the committee desk. I found at the top of the agenda had been another one added, 121. Mr. President and members of the Senate, I think it's time that this Senate stand up and be counted and bring forth 386.
Is there further debate?
The full Senate finally voted almost party line to excuse Watkins and his committee from bringing that legislation forward so that the Senate could act on it today. By the way, that bill has already passed the House. The vote there was 56 to 13 in favor. By the way, officials from INEL did testify before Watkins' committee this morning, and they said, among other things, that removing the sales tax exemption could bring about protracted litigation, and they contested whether the figures of between $8 and $14 million in new state revenue were really realistic. The Revenue and Taxation Committee in the House continues to sit on a whole group of homestead property tax exemption proposals. The committee is holding the bills largely because the Senate has yet to act, at least the full Senate, on House Bill 389. That's the bill that passed the House already and makes some major changes in the 1% property tax limit. Committee Chairman Steve Antone says the homestead proposals will be considered first thing tomorrow morning. The Senate has sustained yet another veto of Governor John Evans. On a 23-12 party line vote, the Senate today upheld the governor's veto of a bill giving the legislature more control over the administrative rulemaking procedure. The issue is a yearly issue around here, and the most consistent battler for it is Nampa Republican Leon Swenson. He tried today to convince the Senate to reject the governor's veto.
I don't think that this bill that was passed here would really be used over maybe, I don't know how many. In the time that we were using this, before an Attorney General's opinion, there was only 2 instances in my memory that we ever dealt with a rule or regulation that had been previously approved by the legislature. And one of those times was not to rescind the rule and regulation, but postpone the effective date of it, giving people who were affected of it a longer time to come in compliance with it. We didn't repeal the rule. So I think this is just sort of an emergency situation where a crisis situation is developed relative to a rule and regulation that we can amend it or reject it or promulgate a new rule by this body. And really I do feel that this is a good piece of legislation that we should override the governor's veto.
I have always been taught through my school years that we have a separation of powers. And to me, that's what we're talking about. When a governor is elected into that position, he's elected there because the people want him to administer this state, to manage this state. Now, if you look back, for the reasons why there are rules and regulations, that is the reason why, so that the legislature does not have to be in session for 12 months out of the year, dilly-dallying with all of the day-to-day operations of the executive branch of government. And that's the purpose of rules and regulations. The very fact that we have the veto power once a year is the answer to the discussion that we're having here today, is that if that executive branch gets too far out of line, we have the ability once a year to straighten them out if we think that we have more knowledge of the situation than they do.
A couple of other non-budget related bills were given final Senate approval today. The Senate approved a proposed constitutional amendment to be submitted to the voters next fall. I should say a year from next fall, 1982. The amendment would remove the anti-Mormon language from the state constitution. Provision in the Constitution has existed since statehood. The Constitution prohibits believers in celestial marriage from holding office or voting in this state. The Senate also today went along with House amendments to a bill requiring farm labor contractors to provide field toilets for farm workers. That legislation now goes to the governor. Surprising little debate in the House this afternoon. Under suspension of the rules, the House voted overwhelmingly for legislation that would authorize Idaho's participation in the Northwest Power Planning Council. Just last week, Governor John Evans vetoed legislation that would have provided for Idaho's participation, but the governor objected to the provision in that bill that would have made it mandatory that Idaho's two appointees not be from the same political party. The bill that passed the House today is identical to that other bill, except it removes the so-called bipartisan language. The debate was brief and to the point.
I think this is a very important piece of legislation. It sets up the council and for the state of Idaho and allows the state of Idaho to participate in that council. Now, the only thing different in this legislation and the previous legislation is that we've removed the bipartisan requirement in this piece of legislation, and on line 24 and 25, we've said that it creates the council in the governor's office so that it does have a home. This is good legislation. I would urge your support.
The House did support it. It now goes to the Senate. Can this legislature end by this weekend? That's a big topic around here and has been for most of the last couple of weeks. Gene McNeil is back now along with Randy Staples, a political reporter with the Idaho State Journal newspaper, to talk with us for just a moment about the possible stumbling blocks that remain before this legislature can quit. Gene, there always are stumbling blocks this time of year. What do you see as hang-ups?
I see about 4 of them that could be. The 1% bill, of course, that you talked about earlier. The Senate might, some Senate members anyway, might well be satisfied, as some of them would have been last year, not to pass any 1% bill, to simply let the thing go into effect, but I think the House will be as firm as it ever has been about that, so they'll have to reach some agreement there. There are still quite a few House members who want to give some kind of increase to state employees, as that vote that got almost all Republicans in the committee in favor of it in the State Affairs Committee this morning indicated. They're going to have to come to some agreement on that. The Senate may go along with that very easily at this point, but that could be a stumbling block. And I think there's a possibility that House members may feel strongly enough about that higher education $2 million that passed this morning, and the Senate may feel strongly enough about the water resources $500,000 that they passed the other day, yesterday, that something may have to be worked out on those two. Neither side may like the other's ideas. As far as vetoes, which would be the only other stumbling block, at this point I really don't see any. I think the legislative Democrat strategy has probably taken hold now, which says that further vetoes would probably be useless.
So does that all point to adjournment by Saturday, Friday or Saturday?
I'd rather predict almost anything else than adjournment, but I'd say Saturday.
What's your guess, Randy?
I think it may well be Saturday if everyone continues playing out some of the game plans that they've been playing up to this point. So far, the session's run almost unbelievably smoothly compared with the last few. So if it continues to operate the way it's been operating up to this point, I think it could well end on Saturday, or possibly the next Monday to wrap up a few minor items if somebody gets into a last-minute debate. The things that could hold it up include some of the items that Gene mentioned. I think particularly the 1% bill and any possible vetoes that Governor Evans might hand down. Those would be the primary items that could hold things up a little bit later.
Does someone have a master strategy for how all these things fit together, or do they just come together by hook or crook at the end?
Well, I think there's been almost unwittingly developed a kind of master strategy for what has to happen. There are a lot of hostage bills in this legislature, a lot of conditions of a lot of particular treaties. There are many cases in which one group of legislators has simply agreed to let something else pass if you'll let this other bill pass over in your chamber. If the 1% bill goes through the Senate unscathed, it may release a small flood of bills in the House that are important to a number of senators. If everyone sticks by the game plan that they seem to have arrived at to this point, everything could flow very smoothly and we could be out of here Saturday. But if anyone starts deciding to get stubborn, then we could run into some trouble.
And it's interesting to me to note that with the exception of that water resources money, most of the wanting things comes from the House side again this year as it did last year. Wanting the 1% bill, wanting some more money for higher education, wanting a state employee's raise. It probably won't wind up the same way, but there is some of that same feeling that the Senate could go home without taking care of those things, without doing anything with those things, but the House would really not let them. Oh, I'd add one more thing to my list, and that's the budgets for the legislative fiscal office and the governor's fiscal office. They have to work out.
Yeah, the governor's not going to have those bills to hold hostage or to veto as he did the legislative appropriation a year ago, is he?
It doesn't look like it.
Before the legislature leaves.
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah, so that sort of limits his options here.
The legislature seems to be playing its own game of hostages with the governor by most likely selecting very carefully which bills it will send to him early and which it will send to him later. And I think that there's probably a great deal of understanding about what that may lead to as well.
The Senate is taking its time on the higher education appropriation too, which may be another move like that.
Yes.
Thank you both. We'll see if we are done by Friday or Saturday. We reported here last night the intra-industry spat between auto dealers and auto manufacturers. Today, the Senate Transportation Committee voted to amend a bill which would force auto manufacturers to pay auto dealers for the full cost of repair work done under warranty. Democrat Ron Beidelsbacher of Grangeville says he wants to amend that bill to attach a one-year sunset clause. Auto dealers contend that they'll lose money because manufacturers won't pay them for the actual costs of parts and labor. Lewiston Democratic Senator Mike Mitchell says he's considering a race for lieutenant governor. Mitchell, a state senator since 1970, is the first Democrat and the first legislator to say he's interested in the job now being held by Republican Phil Batt. 55-year-old Mitchell is the ranking Democrat on the Senate's Finance Committee. He also serves as the Minority Caucus Chairman in the Senate. Mitchell has mailed out about 400 letters to Idaho Democrats asking them for comments on a possible race. He says he won't make a decision himself before September. Several other Democrats are being mentioned as possible lieutenant governor hopefuls, including former State Senator Cy Chase of St. Mary's, State Senator Is Merrill of Blackfoot, and former Republican State Representative Butch Otter. He says he is also interested in the Republican lieutenant governor nomination. I have to leave it there tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow night. I'm Mark Johnson in Boise. Good night.